The glug, glug, glug of Albany. All right, let's look at the swamp of corruption that we call Albany. Yes. Former Senate Majority Leader Malcolm Smith, he was sentenced earlier today to 7 years in federal prison. He convicted of trying to bribe his way onto the ballot for the New York City mayoral election. He is a Democrat, but he tried to get onto the Republican line here, and there was a lot of yellow envelopes, and I think, was there a CEDA involved? Mark could get into all of this. It's never dull when you talk corruption in Albany. And I should say Mark can speak to it because he is representing Mr. Smith on his appeal, and in fact was in the courthouse in White Plains earlier today. Many people thought he might have even gotten more, 7 years. We were talking in the break. It was right around there. In fact, less than the guidelines would have mandated. Is it what you expected?
It's what I expected. I can't really talk in specificities about the case, but it wasn't a surprise, at least not to me, the amount of time that he got.
So now it goes to, you're hoping obviously appeal, right?
Yeah, we're gonna handle the appeal, and I have some definite ideas about it. I don't think that it's the federal government's business to be policing the internal politics of the states. There is no federal police power under the United States Constitution. I think it raises federalism implications and implications under the Constitution's 10th Amendment, and I expect that to be at least part of the thrust of the appeal.
All right, obviously I can't get you, nor I'm going to try to get you to talk about a case that is fluid right now. Eric Schneiderman, under the deal that they worked out in Albany, he's going to get a special prosecutor. We've talked before about different ways to handle corruption in Albany that's endemic right now. Two of the men in the room are under indictment, as we already say, and little birdies are telling me there might be some more news in the next week or so out of Albany. We'll see as that happens, but nonetheless, is it window dressing in your eyes, or do you think that, with what is happening with the U.S. Attorney right now and everything else, that we will get significant reform? Because we certainly didn't get it out of the latest budget agreement.
Well, I think it's window dressing. I think that there have been bills, we've actually submitted bills, proposed legislation that would address an independent prosecutor. But if you look at the jurisdiction that the AG's office already has, there's nothing that prevents them from investigating these cases. I've represented people who were charged with basic misdemeanors and felonies by the AG's office instead of the local district attorney's office. The Attorney General is the highest law enforcement officer in the state of New York. He has the ability to investigate law enforcement. In fact, he has a Public Integrity Bureau, which is designed specifically to do things like that. And that bureau actually exists to rebuild the public trust because, as they stated, that Public Integrity Bureau basically offers every region in the state of New York a place to go to report complaints of government corruption without the fear of local politics influencing the outcome. That's the whole reason you ask for an independent prosecutor in the first place, because you feel that the local prosecutor is a little too close to the police department.
I got to tell you, though, I'm not a fan of special interest groups, no matter what the special interest group is, being able to prosecutor shop and select the forum that they want. I don't think, and we've talked about this many times on the show, I don't think that there should be a presumption that local prosecutors can't do their jobs. I'm not a fan of the centralization of power. It goes back to what I said before, and we saw it happen in Baltimore. We saw the indictments brought by a local prosecutor very, very quickly. So I think it's a bad precedent that special interest groups can force this sort of executive action to be taken by the government.
Their Public Integrity Bureau doesn't exist for special interest groups. It exists anytime that the government itself is engaged in misconduct or criminal activity, and it also goes after civil activity. So what you're talking about is basically telling the people you don't have to fear your government. And if you think about a small town where the government, whoever your town supervisor is, has a heavy hand, your mayor has a heavy hand, and you're afraid to go up against that person. Maybe you have relatives who work for the town. It basically is just transparency. It just gives people, people for a host of different reasons, whether it would be this case with Mr. Smith that we just talked about.
Do you really think he'll be more screwed? And this is not directed to him personally. Anybody who occupies that office, they're a political creature by definition. Do you have any reason to believe that the AG will be more scrupulous than a local prosecutor?
Absolutely.
They're all politicians.
No, absolutely, because the AG does not generally work with your local police departments. They don't worry about the local police department supporting them for re-election. It's a statewide office.
But you know what? And I don't know what the answer is. I think part of the problem that the public doesn't realize is some of the biggest problems in Albany are actually the legal, what they can do legally right now as it relates with lobbyists and as it relates with how legislation can be crafted and the special interest in how the whole process works. That being said, I've seen, and I'm not going to cast aspersions, Mr. Scheinman, I've seen political animals that have been AGs. They come through the political machine themselves to get elected. They may or may not be as willing to go after one of their own. But, you know, Dougie, it's, from my end, I wonder if what he was convicted of, Mr. Malcolm Smith, that is, if he was a regular guy, and I'm not saying 7 years is the right or the wrong amount, should we, the people, have a higher expectation of what an elected official should or shouldn't comport themselves? Should we have more of an offense if there's corruption by a person who's elected to represent we, the people, than if it was somebody trying to get, pass a yellow envelope to somebody else so they can pass a building inspection?
I think we, the people, do have a higher expectation. I think, unfortunately, we see it so much now that people are kind of jaded. They think this happens all the time, and it's kind of what these guys do. But I do believe a judge, when they're considering a sentence, they look at the position of trust that a person's in, and they do consider that when...
Well, they certainly do, and there are provisions in the guidelines to account for that. You have to understand each case has to be taken on its own facts. There's no allegation by the government or anybody here that Smith did this or even earned a penny off it, or that sort of venality. It wasn't based
The
on...
argument was that the money traded hands so that he would get on the ballot, so
Yes.
that there was a payoff for him, if not
Yes,
financial,
not
it
financial.
was certainly
That's
political.
the
With
that's
respect
correct.
to these cases, when you have police officers who are entrusted more than probably anyone else in terms of public trust, who admit to guilt and plead guilty to felonies and then get weekends in jail, they're not getting more than the average person
No,
would
they're not.
get. The average person would not get 28 days of weekends. So when you look at Scooter Libby, perhaps even, when you're outing Valerie Plame, who's an active CIA agent, and then you have a president intervening to make sure that that person doesn't serve any jail time, and the jail time was less time to
Yep.
Mr. Smith and less time, or I believe it may have been equal to the deputy mayor of Spring Valley.
Well, you heard the lawyer for the co-defendant in court today arguing that these defendants were facing higher guidelines penalties than many drug dealers, many gun-toting drug dealers. So
I got to hit a break here, but working on gun-toting drug dealers, Scooter Libby, and everything else in the last 30 seconds, not an easy segue. All right, we come back, though. One of Doug's favorites. The NSA had its spying powers scaled back by a federal appeals court last month. But if you think it ended there, you'd be wrong. The FISA court just ruled the spy agency can resume collecting phone records of Americans making domestic calls. What? We're going to pull the veil back on this FISA court. Who are they? What do they do?
Nobody knows.
And exactly who really is the final authority on this? Stay with us.
nobody knows that either.